you'll get to see what we mean about shining a new light, because that is very pertinent for the way this product actually works. So I'm going to take you through some of the slides and some of the information just to get some perspective as to why we've introduced this product and how pertinent it is actually at this very moment in time. Because I'm sure we'll all agree that the world has changed actually. And of course, many of our needs, particularly our health needs at this time, are paramount and right up there at front, and much big concern for many people in terms of prevention, keeping ourselves healthy, keeping our families healthy. And that's exactly what Neolife's job is, actually, to help you to achieve that. So that is why we've introduced Neolife's Vegan D, and we're going to talk about the name and obviously the content and the vitamin involved as we go through. So you'll get to understand why we've called it Vegan D, and basically it's a vitamin D supplement, but not an ordinary one, because nothing from Neolife is always ordinary. So just a reminder, just as I say, nothing is just ordinary. We don't just talk about, this is a bottle of tablets and pop them and you'll feel better. It's a whole holistic approach, and part of our job is to educate, to uplift people, to enlighten them, to expose them to new ways of thinking, and to reassess what it is they're doing with their health and that of their family, and just how they're feeling mentally and physically. So all these things, these little icons, and many of us, we see them frequently, and I don't know that we always take them seriously, but we're going to talk a bit more about them and show the relevance of a healthy lifestyle in terms of Neolife's approach. But of course, yes, we are about nutrition. We're a health and wellness company, so nutrition, of course, is critical. Balanced nutrition. You always get told, well, eat a balanced diet and you'll get everything. I don't think anyone fully understands, and I don't think we've even really achieved a balanced diet, but that is often what's bandied around. And so it's quite a challenge, though, to every day get all the nutrients that you need in order to achieve this balance on your plate. I'm sure you'll agree with me, and certainly at Neolife, we try to encourage people to look at their plate, tweak it, get the right balance, but we all know that isn't always achievable on a daily basis. So we're going to look at vitamin D this evening. And why are we looking at vitamin D? Why is there even an inadequacy? Well, as Drew said, it's something that is being talked about. Vitamin D has been around for a long time, but the research has been growing and growing over the last decade or so, and more recently in the more recent years, because we've discovered, as science has, that there's quite a high level of inadequacy around the world. And in fact, in Africa, which is what we're concerned about, upward of 60%, and depending, where you live on the continent and the season of the year, sometimes that number even goes up to 70, the upper 70%, which is quite amazing and something we weren't really aware of. And around the world, on all the continents of the world, these numbers are really, really high. So vitamin D is something that we really need to concern ourselves about generally, because science didn't realize that we were inadequate, and of course, particularly now under the circumstances that we're living in. So just a little bit of information about vitamin D. Yes, we get it from dietary sources, we get it from supplementation as well. But in fact, to get perspective, there are two different forms of vitamin D, and we don't have to get, bogged down about the D2 and the D3. This sort of information has been around a while, and you'll probably have noticed some people, challenge one up against the other. But as research has developed, we've realized both are equally important, both are equally well absorbed. And some we get from our food. Our food isn't particularly rich in vitamin D, but we get some of it from our food. And of course, you may not be aware that we can make vitamin D in our bodies, but we need sunlight in order to do that. So when we have sunlight, it actually makes contact with the skin, and it's then in a pre-vitamin form, and then the body then changes it via the kidneys and the liver into an active form of vitamin D. So that's quite an interesting thing that probably some people aren't aware of. We can actually manufacture it if we have the right exposure to things. So we're going to talk vitamin D2, D3, because that's what makes our product very unique. But yeah, so who is most at risk of this vitamin D inadequacy that we're talking about? Well, as I said, think about the sun, think about the fact that we can make vitamin D if we have adequate amounts. So where you live, in other words, where on the planet you live, where on the continent you live. That's why I said sometimes that number is 60%, sometimes it's higher. The closer you live to the equator, which is where the sun is at its strongest and most abundant, then you're less likely to be inadequate. But the further away from the equator you live, north and south, obviously the sun isn't as available all year through. So that's one issue where we live. Our lifestyles today, we work indoors. That's what we do. We work a lot. And also, of course, just the gadgetry that we use, we can communicate. We don't even have to go out and socialize these days. And we're also restricted in doing that. But we use technology. We're indoors a lot. So we're actually not exposed as much to the sun as we thought we were. And on a sunny continent like Africa, who would have thought that we were, in some cases, 70% inadequate in our vitamin D, in spite of our sunshine. But interestingly also, because our skin is involved here, the darker our skin, the more protected it is against the sun. So in fact, it repels some of the sun's rays as a protective mechanism. So the darker the skin tone, the longer one has to actually be in the sun in order to be able to get the benefit from vitamin D, which is an interesting thing. And of course, as we age, like with most things, even though the body can synthesize it, whatever the nutrient might be, we're less efficient at doing that as we get older. And then an interesting thing is, and a common problem around the world is that people are carrying too much weight, and vitamin D is an oil-soluble substance. So it can be stored, for example, in the liver and be utilized. But if there's a lot of fatty tissue around, it can also be stored in there. So sometimes it gets stored rather than used, particularly if we're carrying a bit too much weight. So just some interesting pointers as to why this is actually happening. And of course, we get mixed messages. We've got a very strong message about sunlight. Protect yourself, sunscreens, and of course we get encouraged to apply it this many times and frequently. And so what was happening is that in spite of all those other factors I talked about, where we live and living and working indoors, we're actually, even when we're out of doors, protecting ourselves from the sun, which of course is very important, but it can be a confusing message. And it's not just about walking around in the sun. In fact, we have to expose our skin for a fair length of time, fairly frequently, to the ultraviolet B rays, which are the burning rays, if you like. That's when we're going to actually manufacture or synthesize the maximum amount of vitamin D. So I think you can see it's quite a challenge, a bit of a mixed message, and certainly the dermatologists are saying, you need to be careful of the sun, and rather than, concerning yourself with the adequate amount of vitamin D, we need to get that from other sources. And here comes the challenge, of course. We don't always achieve what we thought we would, given the sun that we actually are exposed to. So the source of what we can tap into in terms of making vitamin D is a challenge. And of course, we're told to eat that healthy diet, as I was talking about. But the interesting thing is that vitamin D isn't that abundant in our food supply. Some fatty fish, a few of them would be the sort of richest sources in the fish liver oils. And they're just smaller amounts in other food sources so we don't really have a rich supply of vitamin D available to us on a regular basis. And an interesting thing also is what is happening in our lifestyles, I think in general around the world, is that people are being encouraged, actually, as we are at Neolife, encouraging people to eat more plant-based nutrients. I mean, fruit and vegetables are plant-based, whole grains are plant-based. And many people are taking this very seriously and adding more plant-based nutrients to their, and foods to their plate. I mean, in our communities, we've got a variety of different patterns of dietary choices. People love to eat meat in South Africa, but many are still adding more plants and fruit and vegetables to their protein source, whether it be animal beef or whether it be fish. And some are then deciding, I'm going to go more towards the vegetarian side or more of the plant-based, and some go to the other side of the spectrum, which is what we call vegan, where they choose only plant-based nutrients and no animal-based nutrients at all. Sometimes their food choices might be entirely raw, some will be cooked, and of course also their lifestyle choices. Perhaps they won't have anything that has been derived from an animal, so maybe not even using wool or leather or perhaps even honey, because it comes from a living entity. So those are different choices that we're seeing around the world. And that's why we say our world really is changing in many different ways. And so because vitamin D isn't very abundant in our food supply anyway, and it's even less available in plant-based nutrients, there's a big challenge to be able to get adequate amounts from our diet. And given those other restrictions I was talking about, it's quite a challenge to get enough vitamin D. So that is why we have chosen to have a product that we have called Vegan D, simply because we want people to realize that it is plant-based. So it satisfies the needs of people on that end of the spectrum, but of course satisfies everybody on the other end of the spectrum. So it's not just for vegans, it's for everybody, because of the fact that it's not available in our general plant-based foods and in our diet in general, and very specifically in people who are eating larger amounts of your plant-based nutrients, which is very good for you, but not necessarily when you're looking for vitamin D. So that's why it's called Vegan D, but it's for everybody. So I think you'll agree that it's a very important piece of the puzzle in terms of our diet. And we're very proud that we can actually, put this into the puzzle of our dietary recommendations and have people get adequate amounts of vitamin D. And so we talked about the fact that the world is changing and so our health needs. And so let's look at the health aspects of vitamin D in our diet, and of course the challenges of inadequacies. And then we say here it's for more than just bone health, but that doesn't diminish the fact that it's extremely important for bone health. So we're going to go through some of these different aspects that we are talking about in terms of vitamin D and our health. And I do want to just touch on bone health because it's crucially important. So together with the calcium and magnesium and phosphorus, because bone isn't just made of one or two entities, it's a combination of different minerals. And we need vitamin D there to be present in order for the calcium, for example, to be absorbed. So if we don't have adequate amounts of vitamin D, then our bone health comes into play, the challenges that we have. And right through the life cycle, vitamin D is very important for bone health, whether we've still actually in the developmental stage, or whether we're actually at the other end of the spectrum, and elderly, we need vitamin D. And these are some of the issues. Rickets, for example, will happen in children predominantly, and the adult form of rickets, which is a weakness of the bone in adults, is called osteomalacia. So let's just look at this issue with rickets, because it's actually quite an amazing thing. We talk about it, but we don't always think it's actually happening around us, but it truly is. And so that basically means that there isn't enough vitamin D in order for the calcium that might be present to be absorbed and utilized and even the phosphorus to actually build strong bones. So what happens when children are growing is that their legs, for example, the bone cannot carry the weight of the body. So it tends to bow like that, whether it's inwards or outwards. And that's a very real issue. And of course, it's not just the legs where that happens. It happens in various parts of the body, even on the head, for example. And of course, because we'll talk about vitamin D in terms of immunity, you'll find that in actual fact, they're often compromised in terms of their health right through their lives. So this is a very real and very tragic thing when it's actually avoidable, but very real nevertheless. And you'll see there just in that little sort of graphic that the legs on the right-hand side of the picture, they are just showing that there isn't as much calcification happening in that bone, simply because there isn't adequate amounts of vitamin D. Right, so we are now going to talk from bone health into something else that's very, very important right now in our daily lives. And of course, that is our immune system. And so we talk about vitamin D, and that's a very big, powerful part of this product right now. Right now, in this, as I say, in our health crisis, we've just come through winter, so we haven't had very strong sunlight. So there's a very high need right now for us to actually, look at our vitamin D intake, see whether we're part of the statistics of the people that haven't got adequate amounts, and make sure that we do have vitamin D in our diet. If we can't get it from the foods that I showed you, well, we need to really consider how we're going to supplement our diets. So it's important for every aspect of our immune system. We have what we call a first line of defense and then a second line of defense. And so the first line of our immune defenses are actually our digestive tract. In other words, the barrier function that comes when we swallow something. Our skin, of course, becomes it's our protector, an external one that we can relate to because we can see it. And then, of course, the respiratory system. So these are systems that are the lining of the respiratory system, for example. These are protective areas. It might seem strange to think, you can see the skin is external to the body, if you like, but it might be strange to think that your digestive tract is also, if you like, an external thing, because when you swallow something, it doesn't automatically get into the bloodstream straight away. It goes through all the tubing and the piping. So it's still external, if you like, to the actual body. Same with the lungs. We breathe in something and it's got to still make its way into the bloodstream. So these are first line defenses that we have, and extremely powerful ones and very important ones in our immune system in general. So the gut lining or barrier, the lining of the respiratory system, and of course, the integrity of the skin. And I think we've all heard a lot about the importance of strength of our respiratory system, because at this particular time, in this particular virus that we're all exposed to, but I mean, it could be the flu virus, things that we breathe in are going to get into our lungs. And so the quality of our first line of defense is extremely important. And there's a lot of research being done now to show that vitamin D is definitely going to help against respiratory infections in general. So if we want to optimize our health, the nutrient content of our foods, and make sure that we've got adequate amounts of vitamin D, that way we'll be able to at least have a good baseline in terms of our first lines of defense against anything that might come our way. And there is a lot of strong research now to suggest that, under the present circumstances, we really need to consider our vitamin D content in our diets and in our bodies for our respiratory health. So these are our first lines of defense. And then, of course, the rest of our internal immune system, in other words, all those different immune cells that we have, some more specifically than others, they kick into play these sort of antimicrobial component, and they defend us against these invaders if they do get into the bloodstream and into the body as such. So there are two different aspects, and we need vitamin D for both of them to be able to mobilize them all and have them work effectively for us. So we talked about the things that we seem to know, bone health, for example, certainly the immune system. We understood that it was vitamin D had played a part, but we understand a lot more now, given our immune challenges that we're exposed to. But, talking about the fact that there is so much more research, and we've realized, in fact, science has, that we've got receptors, or if you like, nutrients that will receive vitamin D all over the body. And some of it we don't fully understand how they all work, but I mean, look at all the systems of the body that in fact we find little parking spots, if you like, that will receive vitamin D if we have it in the bloodstream. So it actually influences the whole body, in fact. But not all of it is fully understood, but can you just see what an important nutrient it is, and the fact that we have inadequacies around the world, makes it even more important. So as I said, we looked at our little graphics, and I think you'll start to realize, given the challenges that we have, we can't always achieve vitamin D that we need and achieve some of these aspects of a healthy lifestyle just by food alone. So that is why supplementation has a part to play, provided the body recognizes it, provided the body can use it. And that's a big thrust in terms of what we do at NeoLife, to make sure that we provide something that comes from a food source that the body can recognize and use. But I want to go through a few of these little aspects, as I say, that we tend to see, and we've heard them all before, and we're going to do it tomorrow and never do it, and just show you how something like vitamin D, for example, can actually make a difference to some of these aspects of our healthy lifestyle, as opposed to just perhaps what we eat or just some of the things I talked about. So, for example, exercise. Yes, we have to go out and do the exercise, but vitamin D actually helps us when we do the exercise in terms of building muscle, for example, generating energy, even giving us a greater capacity to actually do the exercise. And our physical performance is actually significantly enhanced by the fact that we have adequate amounts of vitamin D. And even sore muscles and muscle strains are helped along, if you like, while we're doing the exercise, if we have adequate amounts of vitamin D. So it's not just about having to get up and, go and do some exercise because it's good for you. Vitamin D, funny enough, helps you be better at doing that. So worth having vitamin D in your diet. Even sleep, for example. You know, I showed you all those different receptor sites and where vitamin D actually plays a part. Well, it certainly plays a part also in the brain. And they found it has a little receptor or parking spot, if you like, in the area of sleep regulation. So it regulates our sort of sleep-wake cycle. And it seems to have an influence on the quality of our sleep. There's quite a lot of debate as to whether it enables you to sleep a bit longer, but it's certainly the quality and the depth of your sleep and so the benefit of it. But what's also interesting in terms of the amount of sleep people have is that those with a low vitamin D intake seem to actually sleep more than they should. They're sort of excessive sleepers. I mean, we tend to get that in the elderly where they tend to fall asleep a lot, but it's possibly because they are low in vitamin D. Remember those problems we have being exposed outdoors. Many elderly people are not outdoors enough. The fact that we're just aging means we actually manufacture much less than we typically used to. So that's possibly one of the triggers that causes people to, constantly fall asleep. So too little vitamin D causes one to upset one's sleep pattern and perhaps want to sleep more than is healthy, actually. And of course, stress, we're always told to manage it, and it's easy to say, manage your stress. But in fact, interestingly, vitamin D, it's as vital for mental health as it is essential for physical health. And usually in the scope of mental health, we talk depression, negative emotions, and perhaps quality of life, but it actually addresses a broader spectrum of that. So just general stress, nervousness, mood, just our self-esteem or just our level of happiness. It seems like if we have adequate amounts of vitamin D, we tend to definitely have an uplifted state of mind. And in fact, there is research to show that there's a positive relationship between vitamin D intake and depression, or inadequate amounts of vitamin D and depression. Most of the research has been done on adults, but there's definitely people looking into children. And I think right now we've started to realize that we need to look at the mental health of our whole family. And so these sort of factors that they've found in adult research definitely relate as well to children. So we need to make sure that our children are getting adequate amounts of vitamin D. So just in some of those little, icons that you saw, you can start to see vitamin D has a part to play. Okay, so obviously if you're a cigarette smoker, we would generally recommend that you, try and stop smoking, not as easy as it's said. But because cigarette smoke, we know, has many challenges to the system in general, but in form of vitamin D, it actually affects the production of some of the active forms. Remember, we manufacture vitamin D, but it has to be activated in the body. And it tends to affect the availability of this active form in our lungs, in the cells of our lungs. It also may affect that little parking spot, the receptor site, and receiving vitamin D in the lung tissue. But there is also a value in actually having vitamin D in the system, even if you are a smoker, because it does tend to, because it works in the respiratory area and in the lung tissue, it definitely helps to at least keep it healthier than it might otherwise be. And it also seems to promote, it's got antioxidant properties, or it promotes antioxidant development in the body. So it might well help against the oxidative stress that cigarette smoke is going to affect the lungs and the body in general. So there's challenges by the fact that cigarette smoke affects us in terms of using vitamin D. That's why we need to make sure that we have it, even if we take it in a supplement form, but also is helpful in protecting the cells of the lungs if we are a cigarette smoker. But of course, the first prize would be to try and give it up. Yeah, so if we, as I say, just looking at those little icons again, we can achieve something more than just the physical aspects of all these things that we've been told to do by actually having something in our diet that enables us to achieve them more effectively. But since our diet is lacking in vitamin D in general, supplementation really comes to the fore here. And that's what's so exciting about the fact that we have introduced a vitamin D product on its own, where we can actually add to the other concentrations in other products and add to the foods that you're actually eating. So when you see these little icons in future, know that they actually matter, and that you can help yourself along by having a good diet and achieving these things. So I think our vegan D definitely is probably one of the missing pieces in this puzzle. It was quite interesting to see, as I say, how the vitamin actually helped us with some of the other lifestyle components, not just only from a dietary point of view. Right, so how much vitamin D do we actually need and what is recommended? And these are just some of the numbers. You probably won't remember them all specifically, but what I just want to point out is you can see right through the life cycle that we need to have vitamin D. Even in pregnancy, it's important. And in fact, very important in pregnancy, because what can happen is if young moms don't have adequate amounts, and obviously the little infant's not going to have, and the breast milk is not going to have enough. So that already compromises the bone tissue, for example. So you'll see that a child from 1 year old is taking the same as all adults. It's a very important nutrient right through the life cycle. And older adults, as I said, remember, we're not as effective as utilizing the sun where we need to be able to try and make vitamin D. So from about at least 70 years onwards, 800 units, so it's more than the average. And the upper limit, just to give you some perspective, is about 4,000 international units. That's just a yardstick. So just to give you some sort of measure of what we should be taking in. And these numbers, incidentally, these recommendations have all been increased right around the world in all communities fairly recently. So these are the sort of newer numbers, if you like. So that's why we believe we've got a new breakthrough in vitamin D supplementation, because you can see the challenges, you can see the importance of it. It's crucial, in fact, at this time, and we're not able to achieve it from our diet and from the sunshine alone. So we have put together a very unique product because, as I say, it satisfies the whole spectrum of dietary choices people have, and that's hugely important. Because remember, it's not very available in our food supply, and particularly not in the plant-based foods. And what we've done, which is unique on the market, is that we've put a blend of both of these different forms. And as I say, we don't have to get bogged down by the detail of them. Let's just know that we have both of them. And in fact, I tried to do some research just to sort of in the marketplace to see if there were other products that had both of these. I could only find one, which is one you can only buy online. And it's not something that's available on the shelves in South Africa. So, it doesn't give you very much information about it. So pretty much there's virtually nothing on the market that has a blend of both these different forms and from actual foods, naturally sourced, from whole foods. There's a unique plant source combination, which we're going to talk about. And because we've got both these combinations of forms of vitamin D, it's a high potency and very recognizable by the body. So that's why we would say highly bioavailable. So a very exciting combination. Each tablet has 400 international units. And if you go back and you think about the recommended daily allowances that I talked about, that's a very significant amount. In fact, I just want to read to you, just to give you perspective about this recommended dietary allowance, the RDAs, because this is pretty much what the definition is that it will meet the needs of nearly sort of 97% of healthy individuals to prevent nutrient deficiencies. What it's not necessarily enough to do is to maintain optimum nutritional status and prevent chronic disease. So this is something that the RDAs, the recommended, those 600 international units that I showed you, which were for adults, pregnancy, and even children, is pretty much just to keep you away from a nutrient deficiency. And you had to be healthy in the first place. So your baseline had to be good. Well, a lot of people, as I say, are not even got adequate amounts at the baseline, let alone considered healthy. So these values are therefore considered to be minimum amounts necessary to achieve and maintain, not necessarily the fact that you're achieving optimal nutritional status. So based on these statements, exceeding this recommended daily allowance, even the 600 international units, does not necessarily imply that you are taking excessive amounts. So those RDAs are just baseline levels, just to prevent a deficiency. Not the fact that you are getting optimal nutrition. So just to give you some perspective. So this is a 400 international unit tablet. Remember the RDA, the sort of preventing deficiency, was 600 international units. So let's kind of see how this all plays out eventually. But first of all, let's look at these whole food vegan sources, because they can be quite unusual. So just to get you used to the names. Lichen, which is something that we find in different communities, mostly in the Arctic and in the mountains, is a good source of vitamin D3, and mushrooms are a very good source of vitamin D2. So what is this lichen? it is completely vegan because it's completely plant sourced. And interestingly, it's very hardy. It can survive drought, it can survive wet climates, hot, cold. It doesn't tolerate pollution very well. So in order for it to thrive, it has to be in fairly pristine environments, which makes it very, very unique and a very desirable ingredient for us to use. And is it part of the human food chain? Yes. In fact, it is eaten more in these sort of higher lying areas in the Arctic countries, for example, and people sometimes grind it and make it into a flour and they use it in bread. So while it isn't necessarily everywhere in the world, it is definitely something that humans do eat, tolerate, and benefit from. So this is a source, a plant source of vitamin D3. Then, of course, mushrooms is where we get some of the vitamin D2. And mushrooms, a plant source, a natural source. Now, interestingly, when you expose mushrooms to ultraviolet light, which is exactly what we were saying that humans needed to do, they actually generate more vitamin D. So now that we understand that, we actually expose them and we actually increase the amount of vitamin D the mushroom will provide. And so, of course, it also makes it very suitable for vegans and, of course, vegetarians. We also use a little bit of yeast to actually concentrate our sources of vitamin D. And I'm mentioning that because people will say, oh, but I can't tolerate yeast. And there's no yeast in the product. We simply use it as it's a technique that is used in medicine, it's used in the pharmaceutical industry and in the nutrition industry in order to concentrate ingredients. But at the end of the day, there's no yeast actually in the product, simply to concentrate some of these ingredients. So very exciting and unusual combinations, but mushrooms and lichen, which the lichen certainly is probably a new concept to people, but we're excited about it because this makes this product completely suitable for people who want to have a completely plant-based diet. But of course, mushrooms also provide other nutrients, and something called beta-glucans, which you will, now that you know the name, will see it around. It's actually a carbohydrate that you find in the mushroom, and it's very effective for the immune system. And there are other nutrients in here. There's some copper, there's some selenium, and in fact, it's even been found that mushrooms will potentially affect the quality of the microbiota, the sort of ecology of your gut, which we all know, when it's in balance, has a powerful effect on our immune system. When it's out of balance, it also compromises the immune system. So when we're talking immunity, we need to make sure that our gut is in good condition, and these mushrooms not only provide vitamin D, but also help to do that. So they give you a variety of different benefits, the beta-glucans, the gut benefit, and the vitamin D benefit in terms of our immune system. So we really believe we're making a big difference right now when we talk about immunity. So let's just put it in perspective in terms of other products that people
Desculpem, tinha perdido a conexão.
Because we want to actually see, people are asking, am I taking too much, and how do I blend it in with other products that people are taking? So I just thought I would just, put it in perspective for you. So we've got, for example, our core products. So we're going to get Pro Vitality and the shake. And then a lot of people will add, let's say, CalMag to that. So these are the amounts of vitamin D that are in those products. Per sachet, per portion, and of course in your CalMag. So when you add that up, what's it? 200, 700, 840. And then we're going to add some people will take vitamin A and D, and there will be another 400 international units. And that's often a question that's coming up. Well, now if I'm taking vitamin A and D, how am I going to fit my vegan D into that? Well, of course, that is that's an issue that you might want to decide whether you want the extra vitamin A in the product, or if you're wanting just more specifically vitamin D. But the solution would be to actually perhaps alternate them. Perhaps if you want to use vitamin A and D because you want the extra vitamin A, then perhaps the next purchase you make, you can have the vegan D. So that way you're just getting vitamin D in there. Remember that vitamin A is oil soluble, so you do store it. And of course, these other products, Pro Vitality, the Neolife Shake, are giving you vitamin A as well. So you need to assess your concentrations. But certainly you'll see that A and D and vegan D have the same amounts of your vitamin D. However, the vegan D has the source of both different sources, and it's plant-based. So it is something that you can use interchangeably. But if we were to add either one of those products to our CalMag, our NeoLife Shake and Pro Vitality, we are not getting excessive amounts. In fact, as I said, that sort of yardstick upper level was 4,000 international units, and there's nowhere near that amount in this particular combination. So you're more than safe by literally adding additional vitamin D to whatever it is you're taking. And I hope that I've shown you up until now that all of us need to look at our vitamin D content in our diet. If we don't get it from our food and don't get it from the sunshine, we definitely need to supplement. And then, of course, even for our children, let's just look at how our children are faring, because right through the life cycle, very important. So whether they're very little and taking perhaps Liquivite, that's what you're getting in terms of your portions. You can obviously vary your VitaSquare concentrations. That's just to give you an idea of how much you're getting per tablet. If they're taking NutriShake, add 200 international units. So to add a little vegan D, and I say little because the tablet, if you haven't tried or seen it, is tiny, very easy to swallow, very easy to manage. So it's actually ideal for kids and for the elderly, and anybody in between who doesn't like to swallow tablets. But this little vegan D is very, very small, very manageable. So this product suitable for everybody, plant eating, animal eating, a mixture of both, and whether you're young, pregnant, or right at the other end of the age scale. It can be combined very easily with your products. And also just to show you, very, very well priced for all the benefits that it has, all the nutrient content, all the technology that's gone into it. An exceptionally well priced product. There are 90 tablets in there. It's a 400 international unit tablet, so you can actually happily take 1, 2, even 3 if that's what you need. And the 90 tablets is going to last you a fair length of time as well. And remember, you can combine it, as I showed you, with all your other products that you are taking on a regular basis. So at the end of all of that, I hope I've proved to you that it's there and necessary for everyone. Whatever it is you choose to eat, whatever age you are at this particular moment in time, and whatever your health status is, vegan D is going to help you get enough vitamin D to make sure that your body is able to manage the challenges that we have in the world today and make sure that you are healthy wherever you happen to find yourself. And so I hope that we have shone a new light on your health. We believe we have. And if you take the vegan D, I think you're going to find that that is a bright new light on the horizon for you and for your health, for yours and for your family and everybody else you come into contact with. So that's what I've had to share with you tonight. I hope you've learned something, and I hope you're motivated to go out there and make sure that every aspect of your body, every cell in your body that needs vitamin D is going to get it. Thanks very much.